All right, so now we're going to get into the second part with Hitler becoming a point of, or in the government. So the Reichstag, which I don't believe I explained it, is the government. So that's what they call it, like the capital. The capital is the Reichstag. So part of the reason why Hitler was able to get control of the government in the end was because the Reichstag or Congress kept holding elections. So they had probably like 500 members, so about the size of Congress today. But they had a multi-party system, whereas we have a two-party system with, some independents being able to get power. But overall, it's a Democrat and Republican type of party. This would be how Germany ran was they would have like a Democrat, Republican, Libertarian, Green Party, Independent, all these, and they all had a good chunk of seats in the the Congress or the Reichstag. So nobody was able to get a majority. And if you can't have a majority, you're not going to get anything done. So what they did was they would just keep holding elections. So if they weren't able to get anything done, they'd hold another election and try to get somebody to get a majority. This England has a multi-party system, but what they do on a small scale is like the Republicans and the Independents would make a pact to get things done. So then their party would kind of increase, if that makes sense. So they wanted a majority in the Reichstag. So in 1932, 230 of the 600, so it was 608 seats, so it's even more than what we have, became the majority. Hitler ran for president in 1932. This did not go well. As we get what we talked about is appeasement. He became very vocal in this, so they were like, we'll just give him chancellor. He can't really do anything. He has the people to do checks and balances, kind of like our government has, where no one person or party can really, get that powerful. So they're like, we'll put him as chancellor. This will make him happy. He'll have some parts of the government, but that's the thing. So this is how the party representation in the Reichstag is or goes about. So as you see in 28, so 3 years after the Nazi Party is no longer banned, they had 12 seats in the Reichstag. German National People, the German People, the Economic Party, the Catholic Party, the Bavarian People Party, the Democrats, the Socialists. So the Socialists are the biggest party, but they still didn't have the majority. So out of 500, they had 150. Communist Party, which is very opposite of the Socialists, and then, any other various parties. So really, there wasn't a majority. So they did another, election in 1930, which was probably a normal every 2-year election. Then the Nazis gained a lot of seats. So they gained 80 seats. The German National People went down. These went down. Economics stayed the same. Catholics went up a little bit. They went up a little bit. They went down. They lost 10, but still had a majority. Communists went up, and other parties also went up. But also the seats went up. So they thought holding multiple elections and just adding more seats would make a difference. And 2 years later, in July, the Nazi Party doubles in size, almost more. These dwindle down. The Catholics go up a little bit. So remember, Hitler is against religion, so he's not a fan of Catholics. The Socialists stay about the same. Communists are rising. So you see that these smaller ones are going down for the most part, and then the Socialists here, the Nazis, and the Communists are going up. Other parties are going down, as well as bringing more people. So as you can see, nothing really happened because having 230 was not the majority. You needed majority, so over 50%, so they would need 304 or so 305 people. So that in November of 1932, so July, August, September, October, November. 4 months later, they held another election. And as you see, there's less people, but still, it almost didn't do anything because they all lost people because they lost about 30 seats. And then in March of 1933, he held another election. And Hitler's party goes up again, and these start dropping off, and then we get to where Hitler becomes the Fuhrer, or the dictator of Germany. Then all of the seats in the Reichstag are to the Nazi party. So it really didn't matter how many people that were in there because there was only one party. After Hitler becomes chancellor, we see things really start going quickly as far as things that are happening in the government. So, from 1919 to 1932, it's a pretty slow moving thing to where Hitler's gaining more power. Once he becomes chancellor, he doesn't waste any time in starting to get his way in what he wants overall, which is to be the supreme leader of Germany. What happened was there was a fire that started in the Reichstag, or the parliament building, about a month after Hitler took office. I believe he took office in April, and this started in May, I believe. There wasn't a exact cause to the fire, but I think we called him Martin van der Lubbe, took the blame for starting the fire. I don't know why I put that in there, or why I forgot to change it. I changed on your note guides for starting the fire in the Reichstag. Why this is a big deal was because he was a communist. So Hitler was able to blame the communists for burning their capital, basically the capital. So if you think about how when we had the storming of the Capitol, there were people that we took blame, or that we saw, and we blamed them. Hitler convinced the president that the communists were trying to overthrow the government based off of them burning the Reichstag. It is a little bit fuzzy as far as if this man actually did it, or if it was, Hitler's party. It's really unsure, but he did take the blame. So he did say that he started it. What happened after this was Hitler was able to convince the president of Hindenburg right now that the communists are trying to overthrow the government, and this isn't good. So what the president did was he invoked the Article 48, which I brought up yesterday, or in the last video, about suspending civil liberties. So basically, because of the attempted overthrow of the government, according to Hitler, that they were going to suspend civil liberties, which basically meant none of our First Amendment, what we have as First Amendment freedoms, were allowed. And then a mass arrest of communists happened, which you see. So if we go back here, I believe it was in this July was when he was elected. As you see, the Communist Party starts going down. I think it was around here. It was April of 32. So you start to see the Communist Party go down here, so they're not necessarily arresting these people, but they're arresting the other communists. And even though they might have 100 people, they were also afraid to go against what Hitler was saying because of the fear of mass arrests and what could happen to them. So then we get to probably the worst decision that the German government made, which is called the Enabling Act. So Hitler was still not able to get the majority in the Reichstag, as I showed with that thing. So even though he was chancellor, he still was not able to have a majority to do what he wanted. Now, Hitler was chancellor, but there still was a president. So he did have the president still there, able to take his power away. So Hitler really had to toe the line as far as what he could do. So he was generally, I would say, well behaved in his what he's trying to do and what he talked about. He mostly didn't like the Reichstag fire behind the scenes, or it wasn't blamed him. What he did was he convinced the cabinet in the Reichstag that there wasn't an imminent threat, and to create what's called the Enabling Act. This gave the cabinet his the power to create laws without a Reichstag vote. So, kind of how we would do like an executive order. How President Trump or Obama or Biden will be able to do this as well. They will write an executive order, and this is law. They don't have to take it to vote now. In America, they are still able to, the judges would be able to say, hey, this executive order is not constitutional. But that's not the case of this. So they gave Hitler the power to create a law without getting the votes of the 600 members of the Reichstag. So he's kind of overstepping the fact that they don't have a majority in the Reichstag. They had to get 2/3 of the votes in order to get the Enabling Act to pass. How Hitler got this to pass was many of the people who were communists and the Social Democrats were arrested under the Reichstag fire decree. So all the people that you saw in that chart were arrested, so they weren't able to vote. The other people that were still there, he used his SA, which is like a secret police. I can't tell you the terminology offhand for the SA because it's in German and I'm not good with German pronunciation. But he used his secret police to intimidate people. So the effects of the Enabling Act, this is kind of hard to see, but Hitler becomes chancellor. He gets the Enabling Act in 1933. We're going to see a ban of political parties and kind of stepping stones to him becoming the leader. So what happened after the Enabling Act was that the Congress, or the Reichstag, was completely powerless. They did not need to meet anymore because they had no reason to vote. Hitler could just make a law. Nobody had to vote on it. It was just the law of the land based on what he said. One of the things that Hitler did, so he got the power in March, and by July, all parties were banned except for the Nazi Party. The Enabling Act lasted for 4 years, but it was renewed twice. Obviously, after 4 years in 1937, Nazis had full, complete power, so they're obviously not going to have any problems re-upping the Enabling Act. So then, June of 1934 is where we get to the Night of the Long Knives. I don't know the German translation for it. I forget what it was, but this happened in June of 1934 to July 2nd. What the Night of the Long Knives is, and I talked about this with the Great Purge of Stalin, is Hitler started to get paranoid about his SA, which was kind of like a secret police or a militia, I would say, not through the government. So that was the thing too, was we weren't allowed to have the military in Germany, but because this wasn't through the government, the SA was still able to be. Anyway, Hitler thought that the SA was going to start staging a coup against Hitler, so he was growing paranoid about that. He had the SS, the SA, and the Gestapo, which is also a secret police. That was actually the secret police, but that was my easiest kind of terminology for the SS and the SA. He had the SS and the Gestapo carry out executions against his SA. So the SA was around since the beginning of really the Nazi Party. So these were very loyal people to Hitler. But the SA leaders, pretty much all of them, and many opposed to Hitler and the Nazis that they found were executed at the time. Many people were also arrested. And how he made this legal was he labeled those who they murdered as treasonous and starting to overthrow the stable government. So he said, hey, these people are trying to overthrow our government. This is why we had to execute them. There was no legal trials. And then so after the Enabling Act, the only check to Hitler's power was President Hindenburg. So he still had him. He still had to, keep himself in line as far as, not doing something overly ambitious for Hindenburg to be like, no, 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 you need to leave. Um, what happened though really was Hitler was waiting him out because he was old. So after the Enabling Act, Hindenburg was his only way to be removed from office, and that's why he was very careful. But Hitler knew he didn't have much time to wait. He didn't have to, try to have him arrested or declare him for treason because Hindenburg was 86 when he died. So he was very old as a president. So Hitler really just waited him out to die naturally. Um, After Hindenburg's death, what Hitler did instead of becoming president, he just merged the office of chancellor and president together and took over as a dictator. So there was no checks to his power. The Reichstag or the Congress had no reason to meet. They had no voice. Hitler had full power. And this is when he is able to really do whatever he wants because there are no checks to what he's doing. So this is when they start censoring anybody opposed to the Nazi rhetoric. Now, this is when they come up with the Reich Ministry of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda. It's run by Joseph Goebbels. He is a big Nazi leader during the time. He did end up, I believe it was him who committed suicide at the end and forced his, I believe it was 5 or 6 children to also commit suicide. So Nazis were able to control all forms of media. They banned anything that went against the Nazi police. So any movies that were out were created by the NSDAP. Any political ads or anything had to be gone through this public enlightenment and propaganda to make sure it was within their standards. So as you see, they have the blonde-haired guy having the Nazi flag, and then you have this blonde family with the 3 children and the parents behind the I believe it's an eagle or something that represents the Nazi party. Then they go to more censorship through book burning. So this was conducted by the German Student Union. What they did was they basically gathered a bunch of books up that opposed Nazism and they burned them in public squares. The books that they burned were any Jewish writers, any religious books, any socialist books, any communist books, anybody that spoke about gender and sexuality, basically anything having an opinion other than what the Nazis believed were burned. In one night, they burned 25,000 books in the Berlin Square. And it actually was across 34 cities in Germany that also participated. So this was a widespread demonstration of we don't believe in these viewpoints and we're going to burn these books. So this was another way for Nazis to censor, free speech and freedom of, thinking what you want. Remember, the civil liberties are still banned at this time. We're going to lead up to Nuremberg, and we're going to stop before Kristallnacht. So laws leading up to Nuremberg, and you'll learn about what Nuremberg is. But Hitler started passing these laws. One was called the Law for the Restoration of the Professional Civil Service. You'll see a lot of these laws are really long names. What this did was only German or Aryan people could be working for the government or be lawyers. So anybody who was a different race or a different, background, so Austrian or wherever, Jewish, they were no longer legally allowed to be a government worker. Another law that was passed was the Law for the Prevention of the Hereditarily Diseased Offspring. This was mandatory sterilization, so making people unable to have children for those of who had hereditary physical or mental illness. So if you had anxiety or bipolar, or maybe you were born without a hand, or you were, I don't know, albino, I think, like stuff like that, like everyday things that, happen. Maybe you had anemia or you had diabetes. I don't know if it was that, like that, but any of those reasons, um, they would sterilize you. Also, later criminals were also sterilized. But I mean, mental illnesses also aren't usually seen. Um, so there was the kind of, if somebody signed off on it, they would be forcibly sterilized, whether or not they had this illness or not. Um, and just remember that mental illnesses back then, like a woman suffering with postpartum depression, that would be seen as a mental, something that needed to be sterilized, whether because they didn't have a good understanding of what mental illnesses were from back in the 30s. They also had a term for social misfits too for the sterilization. So anybody unemployed, homeless, or alcoholic. So they see these as, you know, bad because maybe somebody was homeless because they lost their job due to this. They're not going to see that. They're going to see that they're a social misfit and also sterilize them. Then we're going to get to Nuremberg laws. So this is laws that were directed at the Jews. And this is where we really start to see the persecution of the Jews start to be widespread throughout Germany. What Hitler did was he, in 1935, so a year after the Night of the Long Knives, where he gets rid of his SA and he is still leader, he starts the law for the protection of German blood and German honor. What this was, it would forbid any marriages between the Jews and Germans. Anybody who was married to a Jewish person, their marriage was annulled. So basically, they were no longer married in the eyes of the government. Only people with German blood could be citizens. And in November of 35, they passed the definition of who was a Jew, which it was based on, and I think the next slide is the breakdown of it. So, like my father's side is German, my mom's side is kind of a mix of everything. So I would have been probably more than half German, like 3/4 German. So that's how they define it, is based off your ancestry. So I'll show a little bit easier with the definition. In November of 26, they took away citizenship from the Romani or Gypsy people and then any black person in Germany. So here's the Nuremberg laws. Obviously, I can't read German, so it's be a little bit more me trying to read it. So this is what they call like a full Jew. So, you have a German mom and dad and 4 German grandparents, and you are a Jewish person. This would be 3 Jewish grandparents and 1 maybe German grandparent. You are still considered a Jewish person because you are still 3/4 of a Jewish person. This, I forget what the term is for this, but this would be where you are considered half a Jewish person. I think in the original, it might be this was still considered a German person because you're 1/4. I think if you were half Jewish, you weren't considered German. So if you had, 1 grandparent was Jewish, you were still considered German, and then if you were fully German, you were fine. So this was the original. Now later they switch it to be, I believe, this person was also considered Jewish, but I think the next slide has it. There we go. Mixed race was there we go, mixed race. So, German blooded, you are German race. This is the later ones. So if you're 1/8 Jewish, so if you, even less than this, so if you had like a 1 Jewish great grandparent, you would be considered German, but you would have to have an approval from the Reich citizenship. So what they did for this was you had to have like a good job or seem like you had to be a doctor or a lawyer or something like that, where it would be beneficial to have you as a German citizen. So there's the second degree, 1/4 Jewish. You're partly German, so you have to once again have approval. And this is same. And then Jew, if you are 3/4 or fully Jewish, these originally, oh no, it was this one. Originally, I believe they had some Jewish people still be able to be citizens if they were maybe a scientist or a doctor, like I said before, but then they switch it to be more excluding of these people. So we are going to stop here. This was pretty long-winded, but that's it for today.